welcome back to another episode of Evolution Exchange. Today we have Dan from Shift Control and Bhavik from Carta. Would you guys like to give a brief introduction of yourselves?
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm the co-founder of Shift Control, which is a new SaaS startup here in Singapore, helping small businesses and startups take control of their SaaS management and subscription management. I'm also the former CTO and COO of ExpressVPN and the Cape Privacy Division.
Great. Hi everyone, I'm Bhavik. I'm currently the Managing Director for Asia Pacific and Middle East at Carta. At Carta, we offer software and solutions for the private markets, specifically to startup founders, as well as investment funds like venture capital and private equity funds. Prior to Carta, I spent almost a decade at a company called Anaplan, where I held various roles across the go-to-market, helped the company go from 10 million to almost $1 billion in revenue over that 10-year span.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Today we'll be talking about the significance of C-level titles in various organizations and how it's evolved over the years. Dan, how has your experience been working with C-level titles and C-level folks over the years in tech?
Yeah, I mean, C-level titles are one of those things that are hard to level from organization to organization. So you'll come into some organizations and they're much more mature, they're much larger, where the C-level actually is very well established and they have their own downlines and they have their own functions and they're quite independent. And then other ones where you're in much smaller organizations where somebody might have a C-level title, but maybe it doesn't actually match what they're doing, or they do it a lot more than that, or in some cases not doing anything at all. So it really depends on the organization.
Okay.
For me.
Gotcha. And for Bhavik, what about yourself in terms of your experience with C-level titles throughout your career so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, at least in my career, there's been a pretty notable evolution. First, expansion is kind of what I saw, an expansion of how many C-suite positions were being created. Obviously, there's a difference between different industries. Something with physical assets and manufacturing tends to have a COO. Tech companies tend not traditionally to have one of those. But there's really kind of these three roles that I see that are like consistent. There's like tier one C-suites, as I call them, and then there's like the next tier. The tier one, obviously the CEO, there's going to be a CFO, there's going to be some kind of chief, I'll call it product officer, but what I mean is chief product, chief technical, depending on obviously the nature of your product. Those three are kind of like, to me, the tier one C-suites, and then everything else you see is constantly evolving. The name changes, the actual scope of within the same name changes. So it's really interesting, and especially recently with, I'm seeing that kind of that initial expansion start to shrink back a little bit as, I guess, the macros change and people have gotten a little bit more specific about where they want to be leveling people.
Are there any commonalities or differences in terms of how companies assign C-level titles to people?
I think no, not really. I think when you get larger, like let's look at a bank, then yes. A bank and well-established organizations, when you get into big MNCs, then for sure they're very set, and you typically know what a C-level title is, but I would say that's the minority of the companies in the world. So for everybody else, not really. It's literally what the company's, the size and needs at the time. There's no cookie cutter for it all.
It seems to be, I'm obviously a little overexposed in terms of bias towards startups and just broadly the venture ecosystem, so that's a big caveat, but at least in that space it seems to be used as a talent attraction or retention mechanism primarily. Like if someone's going to be a C-suite of a function versus a VP of that same function or head of that same function, it usually has to do with talent attraction, certain profile that you don't think you can get to join your company unless you give them the C-suite title, or retention, right? Like you need to create growth and room for somebody internally to stay with the company. So in effect, somewhat pandering to ego as well, which is a reality.
Yeah, I really hate that part of it actually, because quite honestly, it damages a lot of the companies. I advise a lot of companies here and there on CXO and various things, especially with kind of succession planning and things like that. And what I find is that often they'll promote somebody or want to promote somebody just for the sake of promoting them, because that person wants it, or they think that person might go away. But what I always tell people is like, actually, what I think you need to do is make sure that person leaving doesn't hurt your company. You don't need to promote that person into a C-level. Of course, you can if they really deserve, if they've got the things, but the second you promote that person into C-level, they either fail and get fired, or they succeed and everything goes really amazingly. And usually it's the first one, it's they fail. And then you have no choice but to get rid of them because you cannot promote or create a position above. Or you do these gymnastics and titles and then you create like another position above them that's a different C-level position, which is really messy and it confuses all the employees. So my advice to companies is always be slow on promoting people to C-level. Yeah. Tell them that there's a lot of stuff that matters more than the title, pay, options, what they can get out of the position, the span of control they have. Because in reality, if you're moving to another company and you are the CTO at a 2-person company versus the CTO at a 100-person company versus the CTO at a 1,000-person company, it's a huge difference in the span of control and the thing. So the title doesn't matter. It's what you did. And hiring managers see that. The recruiters might look for the CTO in the title when they're looking, but that doesn't mean you can't put in your LinkedIn, hey, I was the VP or the head of engineering, AKA CTO level. Yeah. And then the CTO pops up in the search. Yeah. So there's a lot of ways for me to skin that cat.
Totally. Or these days, everyone just puts everything in the headline anyways. There's like, I don't even know what the character limit is, but if people are using it because they figured out that's what SEO captures, it's getting crazy. So to your point. I
think you mentioned that people actually chase these kind of titles as well at some point in their career. What do you think motivates people to chase C-level titles?
Ego.
Yeah.
Mostly.
Yeah.
And this is coming from somebody who was a C-level. I don't think I chased the title. It came because of the work I was doing. So I joined ExpressVPN as the VP of IT and security. Yeah. And then I became CIO when which I arguably maybe should have been already, but we were small, but there was really no function there. I built the function up, I grew the team, took on another whole ops function. Yeah. Then we made the title commiseratory to the level of value I was adding to the organization. Yeah. So I think that's probably the right way to do it, and not just title chasing. Yeah. And we see title chasing at all levels of the organization. A funny thing is, like a project manager, for example. Yeah. They don't exist anymore. We call that program managers now. And if you look at the old the PMI framework, the program manager was a completely different type of thing. But now people got tired of project management. They think it sounded too low, I guess.
Project manager sounded commoditized. Program manager sounds strategic.
Exactly.
It's
semantics, but this is the thing that's happening.
Totally. I think the other thing, definitely ego, and we all have egos, right? The most successful leaders have some of the biggest egos. I think it's part of what makes you irrationally confident, which tends to be a leading indicator for success, right? But I would also say there's some pretty foundational, you can call it structural or cultural training, I think, that people just get growing up as well, through the education system, through the career days, through college, through job fairs. There's in many cultures, Singapore for sure, even in the US to some degree, depending on where you are, there's a definition of what success looks like, right? If you're somebody who wants to be a business person, then being success is becoming a C-suite. That's the top. It's and CEO, the ultimate job, right? And so I think part of the chase comes from a preconceived notion of what success is, and so it's validation. It's external validation that you get both from your employer, and then with the proliferation of social media, now the fact that everyone else knows what your title is. Because back in the day, it was like your business card. Yeah. You would give that to people you met, but those people have already met you. Now there's this whole profile and brand around yourself as a professional, which LinkedIn, bless them, my brother works there. I have a lot of respect for what LinkedIn is up, but part of the knock-on effects is this title chasing and projecting of who you are and what you do, and obviously C-suites and that chief in the title is just one way of reassuring other people that you're important.
Prestige, ego, and all that.
Yeah, and it works, right? You'll put a C-suite level title in your LinkedIn, you'll get more invites. Yep. You'll get more connection requests. It's just a fact. Yeah. Especially if you're working at a company that people recognize. Yeah. Totally. So, yeah. What my problem is, I get all these people trying to connect with me, and they also have these titles, and then I have to look at their company. Okay, so because there's no way for me to level what level of CTO or what level of C-suite level person they are. So then I have to go, okay, what is this company? How big are they? What's their revenue? I've got to look them up in something like Owler or another system, so I can understand what level of person I might be dealing with, because the title has become so diluted. Yeah. Which is obviously a problem.
Yeah.
Sure. What are some misconceptions around, CXO titles in general?
I think one of the misconceptions that I remember, at least from when I was working in the Middle East, is that when you become a manager, you just walk around and talk to people. And quite honestly, there are some positions like that, but the reality is that position comes with real responsibility in many cases.
Yeah.
And if you're in a CISO position or something similar, it can come with regulatory, or a CFO, it can come with real regulatory responsibilities.
Yeah.
So I think people don't necessarily always recognize that at that point you are at the top, and the decisions you make can impact you for the rest of your life in some cases.
There's also on the same vein, it's like so misconceptions, right? One is that obviously your life becomes somehow magical and fantastical once you've reached this mythical C-suite position, which is couldn't be farther from the truth. I've never held a C-suite title, but I have worked closely with people who have held them. I've seen what I call real C-suites firsthand. I've seen people with C-level titles firsthand. For the real C-suite, there's a ton of accountability that comes with it. Sometimes, like you said, it's regulatory, it's fiduciary. Other times it's just accountability to customers or external parties or internal parties. There's an interesting, some of the data that we can see sometimes at Carta, the tenure levels for like the average tenure of a C-suite is so much shorter than the average tenure of a VP. And I think it just accentuates like something that we know, but when you look at the data, it's crazy to think you're so much quote unquote safer, or you could say protected from that level of accountability when you're a VP versus when you're a C-suite, your head is on the chopping block. If you're a real C-suite, your head is on the chopping block every 12 to 18 months. It's very performance-oriented, results-based performance, right? And then how you execute on that, there's just a wide multitude. Part of it is walking around and managing people and engaging with them, and a lot of it is strategy all the way through to execution. So I think people always generally underestimate what a real C-suite position entails. I always say you'll know it's a real C-suite when you're in the board meeting and you're getting peppered from the board. That means you probably have a real C-suite position, and you'll feel the accountability.
In that same way, I know Dan briefly touched about, you can be a CXO in a CXO position in a 2-man company or in a 1,000-man company.
Yeah.
How do CXO roles vary in importance at different stages of a company's growth, from startup to MNC?
I mean, I can start with this one. I mean, for me, the earlier stage you are, the more your job as a C-suite is to inspire and motivate. I mean, you're basically the reason why anybody else is joining your company, and the only way your company is going to be successful is if you get the brightest, best, most hardworking people to join you in your cause. Generally, it's referred to as a cause, a mission, a revolution, how you're framing whatever it is that you're doing. You'll be able to, I'm sure, speak to this as someone who's a founder now. So that's kind of the role of the C-suite. I think it evolves. As you scale up, it shifts from inspiration to more of a governance and risk mitigation role. I mean, obviously at the most ultimate scale, if you think of like the top public companies, it's so much about that. I mean, a lot of the innovation, inspiration is happening in middle management. Middle management is a thick layer, right? Yeah. Certainly you need to be visionary about where the company's going. You ideally project some confidence, especially investor confidence, when you're looking outwards, especially if you're public. But a lot of it comes down to corporate governance, risk mitigation, scale, things of that nature. So it really shifts, I think, from founder stage to public.
Sure. Yeah, I think too, like the difference. There's a huge difference between public companies and private companies. Mm-hmm. I was the CTO of a public company, looking at U.S. listed but London Stock Exchange listed. Yeah. But man, I did not enjoy it. So I think you're right. There's a lot of misconceptions, and I think what people think is like people just go out and golf all day long, and I wish I could have done that in those positions. And the reality is that those people work sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 times as hard as everybody else around them, because not only do they have to create the vision and push the vision down, but as you grow as a company, when you're a 5-person company, pushing that vision down to your 5 employees is really easy, because you can just talk about it every day. You can work with them on it and say, hey, this is why we're going to do something this way. Totally. The second you grow past maybe like 100 people, it becomes really hard. And that's why growth stage companies are actually, that growth stage is really critical because you can really screw it up. And it's a different kind of skill. And you end up just really being the person that has to take that vision to be able to delegate and trust other people to be able to put that into place. And then you have to be in some way in the room at the right times to make sure things are going the right direction and catch when things aren't and course correct. Because for some reason, there's really nobody else that's ever going to drive it like you will. Because you're the one, it's your vision and pushing you.
It reminds me of the other, I think, main thing that increases in level of importance as you scale for a C-suite is communication. It's like a very basic thing, right? Like communication, but to your point, the bigger the company gets, the more distorted your vision, your message, your initiatives, your directives can be. It's a giant game of telephone through that, huge mid-management layer, the bigger you get. And so effective communication across multi-channel is honestly an art. Doing it the right amount.
And to make the company is even harder.
Totally, the right level of transparency, because you can't be fully transparent. People are like, "Oh, I'm a transparent leader." I'm like, "You're an authentic leader, perhaps, but you can't be transparent when you get to a certain scale at a C-suite. You can't be like, oh yeah, by the way, we got a huge riff coming next month." Like that's transparent, but you can't be transparent. So, finding your authentic voice, finding a way when you communicate, when you let your one down or two downs communicate. Like there's so many layers to it. And then these days, people want to be communicated to in many different forms, from video to audio to written to face-to-face and everything in between, social sometimes, like depending on how big the company is. So that's a key skill that you just keep. It's important all the way, but it just keeps increasing the more you scale up. Yeah,
absolutely. When it comes to different stages of a company's growth, are there any specific titles that become more crucial in specific points?
I mean, I think one of the most critical titles will always be CFO. It's just they have a function that for a CTO, right? You might be able to learn that on the street, but you're not going to learn CFO on the street. At some point, you're going to have to go officially learn some of these things and probably get certified or get trained in the right accounting methods and stuff like that. You're not going to just pick it up.
Totally.
So I think CFO is probably one of the more critical ones that you always going to need. And having a good CFO as a partner is a game changer. When you have a bad CFO or somebody that's not there to help you, it can blow up everything.
Okay. And like coming back to, dilution of titles, when you're starting up a new company, when do you decide to have a CFO or head of finance or finance manager?
I think early on you can have one of because usually you see most companies start with at least two co-founders. It's unusual to have one. So one of the two will likely have a skill that's around that area, at least good enough. You can outsource that early on for sure. I think you guys do something like that, right? I think definitely you don't need it early on, but you need to have somebody that understands enough of it to challenge whoever you're working with. And then once you gain enough revenue and enough kind of traction in OpEx and things like that, then you'll want to bring some kind of finance person in to start handling some of those books and the relationships with maybe those outsourced people.
Makes sense.
It evolves from there. I wouldn't, unless you're really a financially heavy startup like a fintech, I wouldn't bring a CFO in early.
Yeah, I mean, to be really, I agree with that. And like I said, I think there are three real C-suite, tier one, I should say, not real, but tier one C-suite, the CEO, CFO, and some kind of chief product / technical, the product person. I think the CFO comes third out of those three, right? So on day one, you need a head of business and a head of product technical, right? It's like those, you got to have those. Someone with commercial sensibility, someone with technical sensibility, as broadly speaking, right? And that's ideal. That's what we see at Carta. We see that's the most successful co-founder pairing. You're right. The most successful recipe is two. More than that is too many potentially. Egos, equity, dilution, all kinds of things. One is you're trying to do it alone, and it's difficult. And so that's the right pairing. And we see most startups, working with some kind of a fractional CFO in the early days. Do kind of the Obviously, you can get outsourced accounting software these days and stuff like that. And then some of the strategic finance is usually just happening from the CEO themselves, like head of business. It's strategic finance, a fancy way of opening up Excel and creating projections of possible outcomes depending on different levers. That's really what it is. And so you can take a fractional CFO. There's so many of them helping, specifically specializing in startups, maybe even in your industry. So you get a little bit of what people used to get from Big Four, but at a much more palatable cost and in a much more flexible cost model as well that you can turn up and down. And then when we see the CFO, which I agree becomes kind of one of the most important and kind of because they're the third to enter, they're the third, and they need to balance all of these things, is usually when the company raises an institutional round, a priced round, where all of a sudden the math starts to become super important. Not just the math of your cap table, but also the math of your projections, your ability to execute effectively against those projections, and if not, manage your investors, and the IR piece comes in, right? And so usually around your first institutional price round, and definitely once you start opening up for audit, then I'd start to think about bringing that role in.
So the moral of the story is here: don't take investment and just go bootstrap the whole way.
It's a, if you can do it.
Yeah, and then you don't need all that overhead, because it is a lot of overhead and it's a lot of distraction, to be honest with you.
Totally. Founders who can have the luxury of bootstrapping one way or another, absolutely.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
I've dealt with all this stuff, and I'm like, if I can do it myself, let me just see.
And it's really funny. There's, not to digress, but there's adverse selection as well, because obviously investors really want to be in those companies with the founder, because obviously that means the founder somehow, some way has had some level of success in their life to be able to bootstrap, right? Or they have the right friends and family, but you could argue whether that's bootstrapping or not. It usually can still count as bootstrapping, because your friends and family aren't going to give you the terms that investors will in terms of participating in preferred and all these other crazy things that they put in there. But then you've got, we see the whole gamut. We see the founders that are really young and just out of college, out of incubators, accelerators. They don't have a choice. But it's funny because the VCs will get that. But these are the some of the founders that they really want to be working with, and they're maybe not today, although we see it picking back up. But certainly in 21, 22, they were like banging down the door, like, please let me invest in your company. Like, I want to give you this money. I want to be on the ride. And it was really hard for a founder to say like no.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's diluted.
Unless you really have a lot of revenue coming in, that's positive. Then that money, you can do a lot of things.
Right. Like you need to have the motion to scale it with the money.
But guess where we are today? We're at a place where we're laying off everybody that we hired with that investment money.
That's right.
Yeah. So really, like, what was the benefit of it besides an uptick for somebody to make money, an investor to make money in those good years, and then everybody else to get kind of screwed down. So I think we need to balance those things a little bit better. We're not doing a good job of it.
Totally.
Culture's a very big term the last couple of years. Can some C-level titles influence more innovation, risk-taking, or any other similar aspects in a tech company?
I don't know if it's the title. Obviously, that would. I think the leaders. Obviously, the leaders who presumably fill those titles, and whether they have the title or not. In startup land, C-suite titles are often replaced with head of, which I think is somehow a more appropriate title. You're at the top. It's clear what it is. You're the head. So there's one head, right? So there's, you're on top of that particular function, or whatever the head of is. You're at the top of the function. And whether there's, to your point, 1 or 2 people or 10 people, it's somewhat not clear. And honestly, it's a moving target. Leaders definitely have a huge role to play in establishing the culture. And I think specifically when you think about startups, it's really important to get that culture right. It's a tough one because people will use a lot of the same buzzwords or cliche words to describe their culture. Some companies will put them on a wall, so to speak, right? I don't know if those are your cultural values, but you'll normally see them there. And but I think as a leader, especially as a founder, you would have to think long and hard about exactly why you've picked whatever words, terms, or definitions that you want. I think at a high level, we see 2 things that should be in your culture. One, it needs to be a meritocracy. I think that as a startup, that's probably the best environment, and that you can ingrain that into your culture. That's probably the most important thing that you can do.
Yeah, what do you think about meritocracies in Singapore? Do they work? This is where we get into the controversy.
Yeah, loaded question. Right? What do you think? So again, I'll draw a line, obviously, between So in my previous company, we sold exclusively to kind of enterprise companies. So the Singapore Airlines, the Star Hubs of the world, or of Singapore, right? Versus today, I'm working with startups, right? And so just completely different. And I think in general, I think Singapore as a country has a very strong ideal about meritocracy. I think you can see that through its cultural history and what all of the leaders have reinforced. I think in organizations, particularly in enterprise, I don't think you necessarily see it actioned as consistently. Not that people who are performing well don't get some level of recognition or credit, but I think when you think about hierarchies, tenure-based progression, relationships, and the inverse of that is politics, so kind of who you know and how you know them type stuff. Those are unfortunately still very present, and so I think you can differentiate kind of the high-growth, agile companies from some of the more incumbents, established institutions. But the startup side, it seems to be playing out pretty fair in the workplace. We see a lot of people progressing their careers super quickly in Singapore off the back. I mean, you can look at the Grabs and some of the common startup stories, and how you've got people running functions and CEO themselves that are super young. So I think it removes a very historical, cultural significance of age, and that's huge. That's step one in establishing a meritocracy. Because the thing that is hard about a meritocracy is if you really do it right, you're going to have young people over older people. And that's just tough as a society to adapt to when you've been generationally taught that you kind of respect your elders and put in the time, put in the work, and a certain culture around that as well. I think that's the rub in Singapore.
Yeah, it's a big thing in Asia.
Yeah, in Asia in general, to be fair, yeah.
Because you don't want to challenge your elders, and you want to be nice to them. And sometimes we just really need somebody to hear the truth. Like, hey, your suggestion is not good. Here's why it's not good. We should probably do this. Okay, let's move on. And that's the way I think it should work. But it rubs people the wrong way. Your question about kind of the titles. I mean, I think I hear people come up with funky titles sometimes, like I'm the chief innovation officer, I'm the chief something, right? The chief fund officer, whatever it might be. And that it can be part of a culture of a company, but I don't think it happens that often. It happens usually with kind of a quirky CEO, quirky kind of leader. I think most of the time you'll still see with all titles. I prefer people to stay with co-founder for a while until they get big enough to actually know which direction they go. Because co-founder to me is a pretty dang good title, and if you're doing well, then it's fine. I don't think there needs to be a C title necessarily for the people that are founding it. But for everybody else, like I did, my advice still stands. Though, don't jump into C-level titles if you the place in C-level is just because you want to play C-levels. Head of is a much better title. Head of for the size of the company you're at definitely makes sense in a lot of cases, and everybody understands the equivalence.
Yeah. Totally. That was my next question, actually. There's quite a number of unconventional C-level titles that have been coming up recently. Do you guys have any recent experiences with any of that?
My least favorite one is CTPO.
What is that?
The Chief Technical Product Officer.
Oh, I didn't see
that. People have been recruiting for
it. Yeah. Okay.
And I'll tell you why I think that's not a great title. I think it's because, while yes, a CTO can often drive product, especially when it's super technical product. The thing that the CTO focuses on is just so much different than what a CPO should be focusing on. They should be working with each other towards the same goal, but when you have one title that does both, it's just so hard to find, almost impossible to find that person that can actually do both well, or can dedicate the time to either one of those well. So to me, that title doesn't make a lot of sense. And I've seen this recently, especially in this kind of downturn era, companies looking for one person that can do both. Just call it one or the other and say, look, we're primarily focused, like this is the direction of the company. We're primarily focused on product and we care less about tech. Just hire somebody good to implement the tech for you, or we're primarily focused on tech direction and we care a little bit less about product, hire a good product manager.
Makes sense.
So, but just one person with both titles is weird to me.
Could it be people or companies trying to pay for one position but have two instead?
And it's part of the equation sometimes.
Yeah.
Like maybe they realize they need both or they want both, but they can't afford both.
Yeah.
So they try to combine it.
Yeah.
What about Bhavik? Have you had any recent experiences with unconventional titles?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think over the last decade, it feels like we saw a huge expansion in C-suite in general, right? Like I said, you had the tier 1 or 3, then maybe right after that you had some kind of a chief, I'll call it chief commercial, chief revenue, someone in that side, right? That's right after those. Generally you'll have one, but you don't need to. Sometimes a CEO can still keep running with that if they were the business person. You see some kind of a CHRO, CPO, chief people officer type. Like there is some that next layer, but there's a lot. So I mean, just to give a few examples, one that I think became very mainstream. So you see an expansion, and like I said, I'm noticing a retraction of some of those. Yeah. Where it's like, hey, wait a second, we have like 12 people in our C-suite meeting, like leadership meeting. One that I personally witnessed. So I started my career effectively implementing software, and then through many iterations, I ended up leading what came to be called customer success at a function, which is effectively for a tech company everything post-sale. So it would be onboarding, enablement, implementation, account management, upsell motion if you had that, some level of community building, like all that stuff basically. And so there was this huge kind of almost push for people in the function where like, we got to get in the C-suite, we got to make chief customer officer happen. That was the new title, right? And right. And so for a long time there was a great bull case for why that's a C-suite position. You think about a recurring revenue business, more of your revenue once you've hit scale comes from renewals and expansion upsell than it does from new for any kind of market leading recurring revenue type business. As SaaS took off, that became critical. Yeah. And then it was really a push to like CCO to be equal, not reporting. They
all want to be equal.
They want to be equal to the chief sales officer. I'm using that as a simple term, right? Which I think is the accurate term. But then it's really crazy because you saw the whole thing play out where it's like, well, chief sales officer won't call that, called chief revenue officers. They say, well, what CS is doing is still revenue contribution. So this whole like political, I've seen it play out in my own career of like CCOs and CROs and up and down and which ways and sideways, and now we see a retreat. I think Nick Mehta, he started Gainsight, he talks a lot about CS and SaaS. You're seeing all the CCOs kind of tucked under CROs again. As the world changed, things got a little bit more revenue oriented, and you realize like go to market in general is kind of an interrelated machine. So basically, chief customer got tucked underneath CROs, CMOs, chief marketing officers kind of got tucked under chief revenue officers because it's like the revenue comes from marketing.
It's
like they have to be all together, right? And so on and so forth. So that's it's not so silly. I think it was a functional evolution. It heavily correlated to the SaaS business model specifically. Yeah. There's some other really funny stuff. You get chief growth officers, which are like these hybrid sales plus marketing, but can mean different things in different contexts. And then you get some really goofy ones. I mean, we're the culprits of trying to make a C-suite happen. When my previous company, Anaplan, we were all about planning, as the name suggests. Yeah. And we tried to make chief planning officer happen. It was one of our like things of like, every planning is cross-functional. It doesn't just happen in one department. All your plans are connected to each other. So if the sales forecast changes, the marketing plan changes, the finance plan changes. So we had a bull case for why this person needed to be abstracted out of and equal to all the other functions, because planning happens across the functions. And we wanted to make chief planning officer happen. It did not happen. Spoiler alert. It was like we put it out there, but effectively, what we realized, I think what we always knew is that's a good CFO's job.
or maybe COO.
Right. And so it was, but that's like one example where and I know a lot of companies were advocating for a C-suite in the discipline or function or value proposition that they were trying to put out there to elevate the business need for it, is to associate it to an org structure. and to somebody who has the remit and the buying power for your specific solution. So yeah, I've seen some pretty goofy stuff.
You also see some weird, like the reporting line stuff is a huge problem because it's really political. And somebody will say that we had this big argument, and it's still an argument about, well, where does the CISO report to? But some companies will say it has to report to the CEO because like compliance, and if they're reporting to someone below, then they're just not. Then you're signaling to the company that security is not important. But in reality, I think that the structure of the C-suite in terms of reporting is all about the capacity of the person they're reporting to. So does the CEO really have the capacity to have 10 direct reports, C levels? No. Yeah. So you have to come up with a tiered structure. Yeah. And maybe the tiered structure is different than your responsibility structure. It's a people management structure more than a level of importance structure. But I think people get lost in that.
That's such a good point.
And that's unfortunate because it ends up making a big mess. I've had people say, "Oh, no way, I can't report into the COO. I need to report into the CEO." I'm like, who cares, dude? Yeah. You're going to have the COO is just going to make sure that you're being held accountable. Like, you're still accountable for all the things you would be doing under both levels, and you're going to attend the meetings. You're going to be able to dotted line to the CEO anyways.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people get really hung up on it.
Yeah.
Do you see this happening more in more traditional setups, or would this happen in like matrix style setups as well?
I think at the matrix style, it's the same at the top.
The same at the
traditional top. Matrix is pretty much the same. Where you'll see like bigger companies that have kind of like regional divisions, I find this confusing. A lot of like LVMH, for example, is set up this way where they have a global US based or something, wherever their headquarters is, a CIO, CSO, they have all these positions, and then they have regional ones underneath, and they basically duplicate the entire C-suite structure in each like region, and I find that super confusing.
Yeah, you nailed it. I think it's the kinds of companies where the regions need to, like, the company doesn't scale globally in a functional way, and then it creates this really recurring debate about, are we in a functional org chart model, or are we in a regional sometimes, or what you might call like a business unit or divisional structure, and that's where I think you see a lot of this, right? Because then you want to actually create, what companies are fundamentally trying to do is, I think, be more agile and be more responsive to the needs of the customer, which may differ significantly by country or product line depending on how complex the business is. So I'm like a simple plug-and-play SaaS or something where it's like, you got the departments, it more or less works the same way no matter where you are in the world, selling or delivering or doing it. Other things tend to be a lot more local and nuanced, and you need almost, like my current role was a managing director role is across all functions in APAC. Yeah. It's not a function. I don't just have a hardline sales team and a like it's everything: sales, delivery, ops. An employee experience person, compliance people, like really the full gamut. And so, but it's rare. I mean, and then different companies need different things. I think that's where this stuff tends to be a little trickier, right? You can make good cases for both models. You just have to pick one.
Yeah.
Really.
What I've noticed about the model of kind of the divisional model, where you see several levels of C-level people, is that the ones that are in the division are usually much more junior than you'd expect for a C-level title.
That's right.
Yep. So, and then it kind of shocks you, right? It's like, I'm meeting the CIO of company X.
Regional CIO.
Yeah, they're like a huge company. I mean, like somebody that should, like, you're like, wow, I mean, this guy must be like the top of the game. And then you end up meeting these people and you're like, okay, cool. He's, maybe quite early in his career, had some experience. Maybe at another company, you'd be a director or VP level.
Yeah, VP level.
Which is interesting, which is why I also think this title equity thing across all the C-suite is really confusing. I wish we had a system to fix it, to make it, to be able to see a title and actually understand. Maybe that it's not just the title, but you need title plus, so you need the qualifier. Title, CIO of some company, and then maybe that we choose 3 or 4 measures of size or scope. So that's
it's such a deeply ingrained like cultural thing too, though. Like, for example, so one of the I give an example. We worked with a company. Whirlpool was a company we worked with in my previous company, And they had this model, regional CIO, regional, probably the other C-suite, we dealt a lot with the regional CIO.
Yeah.
And part of, not only is like the business perhaps better run that way, I can't comment on that, but there's also the need to most effectively manage your customers and your market. And the problem is people are so culturally trained to respect and value titles, not just internally, like all employees all have an ego and they want it. It's more about your customers, because if a customer gets a CIO on the phone or a chief revenue officer of regional CRO on the phone, the outcomes can be often very different, and the reactions can be different, and the whole dynamic and the relationship can be different. And so, I mean, we did a little bit of this just being pragmatic of when we were dealing with enterprise companies, and we'd be like, yeah, this guy's the country head. I mean, he is. So country head, general manager, sure. Like, just to get the respect of the prospect, the partner, the customer, whoever we needed to interact, same person, same things they have to say, same skills, same LinkedIn experience, like nothing actually changed. But unfortunately, the reality is it made a difference. You could measure it by email reply rate, account meetings booked, whatever the metric. And so it's like a vicious cycle to some degree. It's a self-fulfilling thing. This is, people respect it, we give it, the more we give it, people want it, and so on and on we go.
Ultimately, we're just going to dilute it enough to where that won't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And that return, that ROI basically on giving the title won't be there anymore.
Totally. And these things, you never can kind of decide what the line is going to be, but someday there's going to be like almost a borderline populist uprising of like, what the hell? Like, everybody's a C-suite. Like, this doesn't make any sense
so
anymore.
what do you think? I'm curious now. What do you think would be the next cool title that we use after C-level titles to show a level of importance?
Like above C-suite?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Like, oh man. It's a great question. I've never even thought like king. One. It's not above C-suite, but it's kind of somewhere up there. It's like president. So especially when the BU model, you get like presidents, chairman. Like, these are words that are currently used that have been pretty reserved. Like, chairman means usually chairman of the board. Right. It's a very, what it means. President tends to be like a basically a mini CEO. That means they own multiple functions generally, and that they're sitting above regional C-suites, for example. So I think they're, on a real answer, maybe somewhere there and beyond.
I think even titles like GM and
managing
MD,
director,
like that, they get very lost right now, and oftentimes they're higher than people expect.
Yeah, because like people like very simply like managing director, senior director. I'm like, sure. I mean, you can call me whatever you want, but I could tell you like this is my role. And so that's a good point. Executive director, and there's all kinds of different things. Like here,
I think the banks have done us a huge disservice by having all these.
Everyone's a VP.
Everyone's a VP. Like, when I first realized this, like, you're the entry level, you're a VP. And how is this a thing?
I think it's one level up. It's like analyst, associate, VP. It's the third level.
AVP first.
Oh, AVP first.
It's still a VP. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
Because until you actually look at it, you don't know what the difference between EVP, AVP, VP,
totally,
whatever the other VPs are.
Yeah.
So, I think the banks did was a huge.
And it means different things in different banks as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is silly, right? Because banks technically should be able to normalize their titles a little bit easier.
Yeah.
I think we have the same problem in engineering. We have the same problem in a lot of things where the word senior. What does senior actually mean? Like and it means in some companies senior is literally the top. In some companies, staff is the top. In some companies, it's
principals.
Partner,
but it's never the same in any company.
Structure,
So all those titles end up meaning almost nothing because you don't actually know what they
totally.
mean. Which is why the websites like levels.fyi exist, so you can go figure out what the common level names are, and that person's coming from this company. Let me look at their level chart.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point.
Titles, confusing, isn't it?
Titles.
I've always told people, look, you can call me the chief janitorial officer for all I care, as long as you're paying me what I'm worth, and I can make a difference and do what I need to do. I'm happy. And I think more people should probably have that attitude.
Yeah.
Because it's not about the title; it's about what you do.
I think so. I feel like I said, I think social media plays a huge role here. Like really, really evident role in title proliferation.
Yeah.
And I think what I would say is professional, whatever you want about professional social media, professional media is lagging, consumer social media. And what I mean by that is consumer social media went through this cycle, right? Exploratory, early adopter, whatever, fine. Beyond that, we got to mainstream. And everyone, and Instagram is often quoted, like everyone is posting their best self, right? Look at this meal I'm having, look at this restaurant I'm having, look at my clothes, like everything was like amazing, good. And then there was like kind of what I always talk about, the populist uprising of like, hey, this isn't reality. This sucks. Nobody likes this anymore. Everyone feels shitty when they go on Instagram. I'm sorry, I cursed. But they, it's just, it's one of those things where there was a natural revolt.
Yeah.
And then there was people being more real, more vulnerable, more open. I mean, there's still a mix, but that's definitely the arc that we're on. Different apps like Be Real came out where it was more about like, you can't put filters, you can't, like they tried to bring it back to reality. I think professional media is lagging that. So we're still in that, like, you go to LinkedIn, everyone's something amazing, everyone's doing some highlight reels, nobody's like, oh, we had a horrible quarter and, whatever. And I don't even know what the other side looks like, but I think it's going to go through that same curve where there will be a rejection of this. It's just like, this is nonsensical. It no longer provides value. It's all projecting. It's all showy. Who really cares? And you're already starting to see it a little bit where some people are just like, they'll just be like, get stuff done, right? Like they'll put that as their title on their thing, right? Like almost counter title movement of like, this is getting silly. And so I think it's healthy. It's a pendulum. Like all pendulums, they got to swing back to the middle.
Yeah.
So we think we went here. It was like, okay, first time we're projecting what we do at work. It's a big part of our identity. It's going to swing back to this counterculture, definitely led by tech and crypto and AI and all these, generally a generational thing. And then I hope that we'll get back to a middle where, to your point, things mean something.
I mean, I'm quite active on LinkedIn, or I try to be.
You have to be.
And I often, use like AI tools to help formulate some of the posts. I give it like a very good outline and I say, help me create this post or whatever. But I always I find I have to tone it down so much. The humble bragging and the flowery language in the AI models. Even when I say, hey, here's my voice, use my voice,
right.
It's still super flowery. So then there's a whole class of people who are just saying, okay, cool post.
And
so suddenly it becomes like this weird, and you can totally tell when a post is AI, right? And I'm still sometimes guilty, of course, just, okay, it looks good enough, I'll post it. But I think you're right. We need to swing back
to the middle.
How does that change your perception on things like when you're interviewing as a hiring manager, you're speaking to a senior candidate, and then you see specific titles in his profile? How do you safeguard against, title inflation and stuff like that?
I mean, you have to interview them.
Yeah, I was going to say, the interview process is probably the easiest to drill through that stuff, where you just start asking pointed questions about, hard numbers, direct reports, book of business, revenue side, like you can get straight into it. And then also like, okay, tell me about that project, tell me this, and like get really into like, okay, who were the naysayers? How did you get them on board? Like, you can, couple questions, you'll find out what their actual experience was. Yeah, totally.
I like to, we use this, especially when we use this thing called top grading, and it's essentially a way to go through the entire career history. Yeah. So you go through every job and you ask the same questions on every job, and that's really the way you can see career progression and growth and what their accountability changing over time, things like that. So that's the method I like. Some people like to do just technical interviews and to, tell me a project that's interesting. I don't believe in that interview method because you don't actually uncover anything.
Totally.
You just uncover what they want to tell you. So that's one thing. I think title inflation, and one of the things that you notice is that, hey, I've got title X at the company I'm coming from. I need to have at least this title at my new company. And so then suddenly you're doing gymnastics to hire the person you want to hire because your title system doesn't match theirs. You got to give them the right title so they can come over. And oftentimes we would just say, look, this is our titling system, and this is where you fit, and take it or leave it. But in a lot of cases, people don't do that. They say, okay, I guess we'll give you that title, so you can join. But I think it's the wrong direction, and it's because we don't have title equality across organizations. So it doesn't really make sense for you to expect it. And I'm guilty of it. When I left the company before I joined ExpressVPN, I also had a VP title, and I said, look, I need at least a VP title. Also because they initially said it's VP, and then later it changed to like head of or something like that.
Yeah.
And they didn't have a clear structure of what those titles meant in the organization. So you also didn't know coming in at that point, like, well, what does head of really mean? What does VP really mean? And so a lot of it also is just being able to provide that documentation to the prospective employees and say, this is how our title structure works.
Totally.
And then hopefully they'll get it.
Yep.
But yeah.
This is also why I think resumes won't die. So a lot of people are like, oh, resumes are dead, right? Like, it's not going to have resumes. I get it. I get where it's coming from, but I disagree personally.
Yeah.
Because the beauty or the ideal, thing on the resume is you get an opportunity to be very specific about what you did and some of your accomplishments, the scope of your role. And those things are generally best presented confidentially. Like, you can't, ideally, especially if you're working in private companies, you can't list on your LinkedIn, like, grew revenue from 10 to 50 million, did this, that, and the other, because those are not publicly available information. And so, as one example, I think this is where resumes, I still ask for them. I'm like, show me the resume. It takes work, as we all know, to try to get to a one-page resume. So the more senior you get, you're like, how do I ruthlessly prioritize my real estate on this? 2 pages fine, right? And then you could talk a lot about like kind of what they decide to highlight, how smart it is in terms of specific, measurable, so on and so forth. So I think that's where LinkedIn's are not sufficient, and I think resumes are so important because the devil is in the details. A title in a company tells me close to nothing, unless it's like a really big company where you have some, if it's in Google, Facebook, you kind of know what the levels are.
Yeah.
For example. So yeah.
Awesome. To close off, what advice would you have for professionals in early mid-career looking to move into leadership or CX positions down the road?
I would say I guess my advice would be it's okay, if anything, it's encouraged to be ambitious. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a misconception often when people in senior positions say don't title chase or don't worry, and they're like, well, easy for you to say, you have the title, like you're the managing director, you're a C-suite, like, yeah, cool, it's telling me not to chase the title, but I'm sure you did to get to where you are. And I think there's definitely truth in that, right? So I think the takeaway here is not to not be ambitious. In fact, you should be very ambitious. If that's something you want to do, you need to be aggressive about it. I'll be the last person. I will say, like, anybody who says don't play politics is lying. There's politics is really about understanding people and relationships and motivators and understanding how to make yourself useful to the company and to the people you work with, which is effective professionalism, in my opinion, right? Like, you're not playing politics is like, oh, you're an underperformer and then you somehow get to the top or something like that. And that's the negative side. So I think all those things, like, lean into it, be aggressive. I wouldn't fixate on the title of the role, I think would be my key thing. I would focus on what you're actually doing, the remit, the role, the responsibilities. The leader you work for or with is probably most important, because he or she is going to be your reference, going to open their network to you in opportunities beyond the immediate one. Working at a good company, like picking your company right, because if the company grows, I promise you will grow, and everyone around you will grow, and the learnings will be better because you will have participated in what it is to actually create growth. And so, I guess that would be my takeaway. I think the key is to don't fixate on the title, but definitely be ambitious, be aggressive, and qualify really, really hard your opportunities by doing what we call in sales, like, really good discovery work. The interview process is a two-way street, right? So these are the things I would look out for. Is the company good? Can it grow? Are you working with the right leaders? And is the role, remit, responsibilities you're going to have in whatever role, regardless of title that you're being offered, going to be something that makes you want to jump out of bed in the morning, and something that you can reasonably be good at. You need to have a good chance of success. Getting into something you're not ready for is a recipe for disaster, and it's hard to recover from that. You ideally want to build positive experience after positive experience on your profile, because that's going to be kind of the right way to structure yourself, as if you're early in career as well. So that was a lot, but that's what I would say.
Thanks for that. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
Dan?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that definitely chasing titles is not the way. I think that when you grow, you basically just always try to be able to contribute more, do more, take on more responsibility. And as you do that, the titles actually will naturally come. Because the second people can see you're capable and you're able to deliver high quality at the right speed, things will just come to you. The titles, the money, everything comes.
The work. The work will come first.
For sure.
Do that for a bit, and then feel free to ask for the
if
things.
If the reward doesn't come, that's when you move.
That's when you ask,
so that's, I think, my first one. I think also today, compared to what was in maybe the older systems, is there are parallel paths to go up. So in the old system, it's like you could only go up to management. But in today's world, we have individual contributor paths that get you to the same level, basically, as a C-suite in a lot of cases. So if you and honestly, there are a lot of people who are just not meant to be managers. They're much better at individual contributors being an expert in their field and delivering that at the highest quality and value. So I think you don't have to go for C-level or management positions. Decide on which one and maybe try a management position out. There's a lot of programs now in companies where you can try something out, and if it doesn't work, you go back to your IC. Sometimes I've seen people move between the two over their career. That's all fine. So I think just don't just chase the management titles. Chase the growth that you want that makes you happy. And I'll tell you that being in the top of the management level is actually not that much fun. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of dealing with people, and it's a lot less of the working on the things that you actually would like to work at the lower levels. So I would say the individual contributor levels are a lot more fun to be able to be senior in.
I think there's a common misconception that like an IC route is not a scalable long term. How would you address that?
It's a company culture thing. The company has to have a structure to show that. So you have to have parallel paths, and you have to show the equality between the paths. A top level IC could be a chief engineer. Right? They're still a chief. They're an IC. Maybe they have some manager, some people reporting to them, but they're not necessarily managing the same people, like the same way that a chief technology officer would manage their engineering teams. So they have a ton of impact across the organization, but they're mostly an IC.
I also think today we have more alternative paths to making great money and having a lifestyle that you enjoy and doing stuff on a daily basis that you find interesting. Traditionally, you pretty much had to work at a company or build your own company. Now there's a lot more. I think the access to advisory work and consulting work and fractional work and contractor work is so much easier. You've got, obviously one great software that allows you to do that from anywhere in the world. It eases the cost and complexity of doing business internationally and being wherever you need to be to conduct that business, and takes care of your own personal tax and other situations. You've got marketplaces that help kind of supply demand matching for your skills and companies who need them. You've got alternative forms of compensation that are palatable in terms of equity and base and other benefits and stuff. So there's just like a lot more options available. So consider them. They're not for everyone. The lion's share of people will still probably choose to work at a company, which is fine. I'm working at a company. That's my choice. But I think there's a lot more paths for ICs, and just starting things a lot leaner. Like everyone talks about it. With the AI, you're going to get some pretty useful co-pilot capabilities, or you can start something pretty lean for yourself. And so it might not always be start a unicorn. You could probably build something that scales enough to a profitable run rate that's paying you handsomely on an annual basis and your employees, and maybe that's perfectly fine as well. So there's I just think there's a lot more business models available to people. They need not obsess with their ability to manage a 500-person organization. That's not for everyone. It's honestly not. And sometimes it's not that fun, I agree. Even for the people who do it.
And to me, the sweet spot is like under 150. That's when you're going to have the most fun, because you get to be involved in the most things. The second you grow above that, you kind of specialize, and then you need to hire specialized people, and you just don't have the time or the availability to work in everything. So and some people love that. They like to specialize, and that's where they belong. They belong in a bigger company where they only focus on that one thing.
So one final question. can AI replace any C-level roles in the near future?
I think yes. I think we're getting to the point where people are trying to build C-suite AI bots that a founder could go in it alone, and then ask these different C-level bots questions and get pretty good answers.
Wow.
To be able to operate, at least for the first good evolution of the company.
Yeah, I think long term AI is just going to increase the average productivity of a knowledge worker, right? And therefore, you don't need so many C-suite, right? Like we already said, I already contend that there's a regression back to the mean in terms of C-suite positions in general. I think AI will only accelerate that, specifically like applications combined with AI. And I think the C-suites that are particularly susceptible, I guess, if we want to use that word, is those that rely on prescribed knowledge, what I call it. If you think about accounting as a discipline, finance as a discipline, legal as a discipline, HR. I mean, these are things that large language models combined with user-friendly applications and a good interaction or abstraction layer can be not fully replace, I'm not saying major company, but this is a lot. There's a huge opportunity there for founders. I think some of the more creative work yet to be seen. Just like I think we have to get a lot better at prompting and engaging with AI until we can get to the same creative process that we do with other humans with AI. I do think we can probably get there eventually, but it seems it's a little bit farther away.
I think the AI access to data is still an issue as well. They have access to public data, but they don't have the integrations required to get access to your private data, including
the custom GPUs.
When you're a small company, even knowing where your data is or getting those things connected is not easy. And once that problem gets more solved and you can actually get this data from all these systems that you're using naturally into the AI for it to help you make decisions or be evaluating you, that will make the huge difference. But today, you can ask a question, it doesn't have that full context. You know more because you looked into the 5 or 6 systems that give you context, and it just doesn't happen.
But it's happening quick.
It's happening fast.
It's happening so fast. I have to say, this has got to be one of the fastest technology wave in terms of just like the speed at which improvements are being made. And you're already seeing companies that can do like an enterprise search across your internal systems.
Glean just raised at 2-point-something billion, I think it was.
Yeah.
We've used Glean before. They're an amazing company. I've spoken to their CEO.
Totally.
Love the product. And they basically index all of your stuff.
Yeah. Google and Microsoft are incorporating it into their own native suites, which is what we all either use the Microsoft 365 suite for most of our information, or it's the Google suite if you're using the G Suite. So, they've got that incumbent. And so, this stuff is going to be pretty rapid. It's remarkable. Keep up. I guess do your best. Do your best to keep up. Don't be caught as like, oh, they say AI. I think not. Like I would highly encourage you to just keep up. Keep tabs. Experiment. Use it. It's fine. You may not be ready today, but you don't want to be the one that just got completely outstripped by someone else who learned how to leverage this stuff. And then it's like the people who are like, oh, I didn't think cloud would become a huge thing. My stuff's still on my own servers, and you're like, how did you miss that?
Anti-pattern there now.
Yeah, exactly. But
I agree. And you can start off by just asking it verifying questions. Hey, this is what I think. What do you think? And
totally, that's a great.
At least you get another viewpoint on something, especially when you're working more isolated.
Yeah.
So I think AI is really great for that. Plus, there's a lot of really great generative tools that are coming out every day. I think AI will definitely be around to help, especially in the CXO space.
Awesome. Okay. I think that's all we have time for today. Thanks again to Bhavik and Dan for being on this podcast, and we'll see you at the next episode of the Evolution Exchange.